Port Rygas stank of sweat, metal and desperation. It hung in the air like fog, thick, heavy, clinging to your skin. Everyone here was running from something, the law, the past, themselves. Kael Draven wasn't any different. Once a soldier, now a ghost with a pulse, Kael moved through the crowds of the slave market like he belonged, because, in a way, he did. No one in this place asked questions, and he made damn sure never to answer any. He was there for a drop. Small job. Data chip full of encrypted black market trade routes, tucked in the lining of his coat. Payment. Enough credits to vanish to the outer systems and maybe, just maybe, forget what the war made him. But then, a sound. Sharp. Raw. Not part of the market's usual background noise of shouting and bartering. It was a cry. A child's cry. Kael stopped mid-step, turned slightly, his face tightening. He told himself it wasn't his problem, not his business. Not anymore. He wasn't a hero, it hadn't been for a long time, but the sound pulled at something buried deep, something he thought had died on the battlefield years ago. He followed it, down a rusted corridor lit by flickering strips of old plasma light, past cages and glass tanks, past bodies too broken to scream anymore. The further he went, the quieter everything became. And then he saw her. She was curled against the cold metal wall of a holding cell, too small for her to even stretch her legs. Chains around her wrists and ankles, thick and crude, made for someone twice her size. But it was her eyes that froze him in place. Violet. Not the color. The light. Her eyes glowed from within, pulsing faintly in the dim light like distant stars. Her skin was pale blue, almost translucent, bruised and filthy. Her hair, silvery white and tangled, clung to her face. "Is that," someone whispered behind him, "an Elyndra? That's impossible. They were wiped out centuries ago." "No. Look at the markings. That's royal lineage. Pure-blooded. She's worth more than a destroyer-class dreadnought." Kael barely heard them. The girl looked up, not just at him, into him, and something inside his head shifted. A flash, a whisper, a memory that wasn't his. Cold hands reaching. Screams. Fire. Then, him. Fear and hope collided in her gaze. Kael's hand went to his sidearm before his brain caught up. He spoke before he knew why. "She's not for sale." The merchant, a bloated, slug-like creature with a translator grafted into its throat, twisted toward him with a noise like wet gravel. "You got the credits, human." Kael stepped forward, tossed a pouch onto the metal table. Enough credits to buy a small ship, or a life. The merchant opened it, counted fast, paused, sneered. "You'll walk away with her, sure, but not alive." The others moved. Guards, buyers, even the merchant's own muscle. Kael drew and fired before any of them blinked. A clean shot between the eyes, another to the chest. Chaos exploded, blaster fire lit up the corridor, screams echoed, blood sprayed across rusted walls. The girl didn't move, she just watched, silent, like she'd seen this before, like she'd survived worse. Kael blasted the lock on her cell, stepped inside and knelt. "I don't understand your words," he said, low. "But if you can walk, we run." She nodded. He scooped her up, and Port Rygas erupted behind them. Explosions shook the walls as alarms shrieked. Drones lifted from hangars, and bounty alerts echoed across every comm channel. A price on his head within seconds. Kael ran. The girl clung to him, whispering in a language ancient and lost, her eyes glowing brighter now. And he didn't understand, but he felt it. She trusted him. That was enough. They vanished into the smoke, leaving behind the screams, the fire, and the last reason Kael Draven ever had to keep running from himself. The stolen ship was barely holding together. Old Imperial model, scavenged, patched, and modified by someone with more desperation than skill. Kael slammed his fist against the control panel, watching sparks burst from the console as the ship climbed out of Rygas' orbital ring. Behind them, fire, alarms, and a dozen hunters, hungry for the reward already pulsing across every galactic bounty board. "Stay with me, come on," Kael muttered, slamming more buttons. The jump drive coughed, wheezed, and finally began spooling. A miracle. He looked over his shoulder. The girl, Lyra, sat curled in the corner of the cockpit, knees to her chest. Her chains still clung to her wrists, now smeared with dried blood. But her eyes were locked on him, glowing steadily. Quiet. Watching. She hadn't made a sound since they left. Kael exhaled, slid down into the pilot's seat, and opened a side compartment, pulled out a med kit and some rations. "I don't know if you understand me, but—" He tossed the packet gently toward her. "I've got to eat." She didn't move. He knelt beside her, popped open the med kit, and reached for her wrist. She flinched, just a little, not in fear, more like reflex, a soldier's reflex. She'd been trained, or worse, born into war. He spoke gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." As he cleaned the wound, she winced. Then, suddenly, she pressed her fingers lightly to his temple. Her touch was cold. Not physically, psychically. Like touching a memory stored in ice. Images burst into Kael's mind. A hall of silver spires, stars seen from a throne, a woman in blue armor holding a crown of crystal, then fire, screams, soldiers with glowing helmets dragging children from underground chambers, a sigil, spinning, ancient, the same one branded into Lyra's skin. Then darkness. Kael gasped and pulled away. What the hell was that? Lyra's voice was soft, broken, barely more than breath. "Kael Draven." He blinked. "Sayas know my name." She nodded, then pointed to her head. Memory. Echo. Her galactic standard was rough, but understandable. "You saved me," she said, "from the black cages." Yeah. You remember that?" She shook her head. "I feel it." Her hand touched her chest, then pointed to his. "You... different." Kael frowned. "Different how?" She hesitated, then tapped her head again. "You... don't hear the voices." Something in her tone made his stomach drop. Before he could ask more, the ship's alarm screamed. 3 blinking red dots, inbound, fast. "Damn it." Kael jumped back into the pilot's seat. "We've got company." He spun the ship, diving into a debris field of old satellites and broken war wreckage. The pursuing ships weren't amateur. Clean, fast unmanned with no visible insignias. Corporate hunters or worse, Imperial ghosts. Blaster fire lit up space behind them. Kael dodged left, right, flipped into a reverse dive, but the ship groaned in protest. The hyperdrive was close, but not ready. "They're not going to let us go," he muttered. Lyra stood, despite the shaking hull, and walked to the central console. She placed her hand on it, closed her eyes. Suddenly, the ship jumped, not by engines, by force. Reality bent, stars stretched and snapped. The hunters vanished behind them, lost in the distortion. When Kael opened his eyes, they were light years away. The cockpit was silent. Lyra collapsed. Kael caught her just before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold, her pulse weak. Blood dripped from her nose, glowing faintly violet. She looked at him, eyes dimming. "I'm last," she whispered. "Last of Elyndra. You saved more than me." He stared at her, speechless. "I will remember this," she said, "forever." Then she passed out. Kael held her close, heart pounding. Outside the window, stars spun quietly, indifferent to what had just happened. But Kael knew something had changed. He hadn't just saved a girl. He'd taken sides in a war he didn't understand. And whatever came next, he was already too deep to escape. The ship limped through deep space like a wounded animal. Panels flickered. Systems groaned. The hyperdrive had blown a plasma coil during the forced jump, and now they were adrift, one wrong calculation away from dying quietly in the dark. Kael Draven sat beside the unconscious girl, sweat beading on his forehead. He was a soldier, a killer, a smuggler, not a damn engineer. But if he couldn't get life support stable in the next hour, they'd both suffocate before anyone could kill them. Tools scattered across the floor, Wires sparked. He jammed a power conduit into place with his elbow, teeth clenched. The ship's old VI buzzed. Oxygen depletion, 65%. Kael growled, "Yeah, no shit." Across from him, Lyra stirred. She blinked slowly, weak, her skin pale as frost. But her eyes still glowed, dimmer now, like a dying star. "You should rest," Kael said, not looking up. "You stayed," she murmured. He snorted. "Didn't exactly have time to abandon you, kid. Could have left me in Rygas." Kael stopped working, looked at her. "No," he said, "I couldn't." A silence passed between them, heavy, but not empty. Lyra slowly sat up, wincing. "This ship, it's dying." "Yeah, just like everything else." Her fingers hovered over a shattered console. Then, closing her eyes, she pressed down. Static burst from the panel. Lights surged. "Wait, what are you—" Symbols Kael didn't recognize, ancient ones, scrolled across the screens. A language the ship was never meant to process. The core vibrated beneath them. Then, a jump chart appeared. Coordinates. One of them blinked. A neutral colony, old mining outpost, mostly forgotten, orbiting the remains of a collapsed moon, Peleron Station. He looked at her, stunned. "How did you—" "I remembered." Her voice was soft. "My mother taught me when I was little. Elyndri's ships were made with memory crystals. We never needed code." Kael stared at the coordinates, then fired the sublight engines. No hyperjump left, but if they pushed hard, they'd reach the colony in a few hours. He leaned back, breathing hard. "You do realize you just saved both our asses?" Lyra tilted her head. "You saved me first." Suddenly, an impact. The ship jolted. A section of the hull tore open, not from outside, from within. Klaxons screamed. Metal cracked. Kael jumped up. "Something's on board." He ran down the narrow corridor, blaster drawn. Lyra followed, unsteady but alert. The cargo bay doors slid open, and Kael froze. From one of the old crates they'd smuggled out of Rygas, something was crawling out. A creature, wiry, boneless, translucent, slithered across the walls like liquid shadow. Its body pulsed with faint blue light, the same as Lyra's veins. It turned toward them. No eyes, no mouth, but it knew they were there. Lyra gasped. "It followed me. One of them—" Kael fired. The bolt passed through the thing, leaving only ripples of energy. It surged forward, aiming not for him, but for her. Kael grabbed Lyra, pulling her back. "Go! Get to the escape pod." "No! Go, damn it!" She hesitated, then ran. Kael turned, set his blaster to overload, and hurled it into the bay. A massive boom ripped through the ship, fire and pressure. The creature screeched, not in sound but in thought, echoing inside Kael's skull like 1,000 whispers. He staggered back, bleeding from his ear. Slammed the emergency door shut behind him. Smoke filled the corridor. Systems died one by one. He crawled back to the cockpit, half blind. Lyra was already there, frantically prepping the manual controls. "I told you to go. I told you I don't leave people," she snapped. Their eyes locked. For the first time, Kael saw her fire. Not just a scared child anymore. Something stronger was awakening inside her, something ancient. The engines screamed to life. The ship lurched forward. Peleron Station appeared on the scanner, a cluster of domes around a shattered moon. "Almost there," Kael breathed. Then a fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 3 ships, sleek, golden, silent. No insignia. Lyra froze. "They're Elyndra," she whispered. "But I thought your people were gone." She looked at him, eyes wide. "So did I." The golden ships hovered in orbit like watching gods, silent, impossibly smooth. Their hulls pulsed with light patterns that shifted like living code, not mechanical, not biological. Something between. Kael's hands tightened around the ship's controls. "They're not broadcasting any signal," he muttered. "No hails, no demands. Just watching." Lyra stood at the viewport, her violet eyes glowing faintly. She wasn't blinking. "I recognize the design," she said. Those aren't warships. They're sentinels. Sentinels? Kael asked. She nodded. Long ago, the Elyndra used them to protect sacred systems. They guard legacy sites, temples, thrones. Great, Kael said. We're what? Trespassing on a sacred parking lot? No, Lyra whispered. They're here for me. She turned to him slowly, almost as if the words carried weight she couldn't say out loud. I told you I was the last, she said. But I never told you why. Kael stepped closer. I'm listening. Lyra took a deep breath. My people were telepaths, but not just mind readers. They could shape memory, rewrite thought, influence entire systems with collective will. Kael nodded slowly. So you said you remembered a throne, fire, soldiers. She looked down. That wasn't a war, it was a cleansing. The elders believed our bloodline had become corrupt. Too much power concentrated in a few, so they purged the royalty, executed my family. All of them. Her voice trembled. Except me. Kael's voice lowered. You were just a kid. I was hidden, smuggled out by those still loyal to the line, but the elders, they found out, sent monsters after us. One of them, like that thing on the ship, it was a mind leech. They feed on telepathic energy. One latched onto me back then. It almost killed me, but I survived. Kael exhaled. So, what? That fleet is part of the purge? Lyra shook her head. No, those are ancient sentinels. They're older than the war, older than the purge. And if they've returned, it means they recognize me. Kael looked back at the silent ships, a bad feeling crawling up his spine. Or, he said, they're here to finish what someone started. Before Lyra could answer, a message appeared on the console, not through the comms, but inside the interface itself. Biosignature verified. Access to Peleron Station granted. Then, Royal Line confirmed. Lyra Sa'thel. Kael blinked. They know your name. They know my blood, she said, barely above a whisper. The Sentinel ship slowly turned, forming a path toward the station's docking ring. No weapons fired, no threats, just silent, heavy expectation. Kael piloted the ship into the path. His hands were sweating, but his voice stayed calm. I hope this station still has oxygen. As they approached, Peleron came into focus. The colony wasn't much, a half-dead mining station, long abandoned. Its domes flickered with failing energy shields, and a black rift split the moon like a scar. But at its center, hidden beneath the crust, something pulsed, something ancient. The station welcomed their landing like it had been waiting. The doors slid open before they could press a button, lights activated in sequence, leading them downward through empty corridors and into the core of the station. And there it was, a throne, floating above a pit of glowing crystal, suspended by telekinetic fields, made of obsidian, etched with the same symbols Kael had seen scroll across the ship. Lyra stepped forward. Her steps were hesitant. Each one seemed to echo through time. Kael stayed close, blaster drawn. Is this some kind of trap? No, she said. This is my birthright. She raised her hand, and the throne responded. Light arced between her and the ancient structure. Her hair lifted. Her eyes flared bright. Kael staggered back. Lyra! But her voice echoed, two-toned, hers, and something deeper. I am Sa'thel, last of the crown, memory-bearer. The line is not broken. The station trembled, then silence. Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping. Her hands trembled. Kael rushed to her side. You okay? She looked up at him, her face pale. They've seen me now, all of them. The elders, the parasites, the throne network. The galaxy will know I live. Kael helped her up. You really want to be found? She stared at him, calm, steady. Yes. Then what happens next? She turned back to the throne. I take back what they tried to erase. Kael Draven had seen death in many forms, warfields, ambushes, starvation camps. He had never seen a life quietly dying, day by day, until he stepped onto Tarkon 7. The planet was grey. The skies were always overcast, the horizon a blur of ruined cities and scorched plains. Winds carried the scent of decay and dust that burned lungs like ash. Tarkon 7 had once been a mining hub, but now it was nothing more than a dumping ground for failed colonies, exiled humans, and the detritus of a galaxy that had long since abandoned them. Kael walked through the streets, blending in with the broken. His hair had gone silver, his face was lined with scars and regrets. He kept his head low. No one remembered him, no one wanted to, and he preferred it that way. He entered a small cantina, the kind that smelled of mold and cheap alcohol. The barkeep barely glanced at him as he slid into a booth. "Old news," the bartender muttered. "Nobody cares." Kael smirked bitterly. "Perfect." He sipped the warm, bitter liquid, letting it burn down his throat. Memories of Lyra, the girl he saved 20 years ago, flickered in his mind. How she had trusted him, how her small hand had clutched his. He had vanished into the void afterward, leaving her with nothing but the hope that someone human had believed she deserved to live. And now, the cantina doors slammed open. A shaft of gold light cut through the smoky air. Kael instinctively reached for his blaster, but it was too late. Figures in gleaming armor flooded the room, their presence commanding silence. The golden insignia of Elyndra caught the dim light. Impossible, majestic, and terrifying. "You are Kael Draven," a commanding voice declared. Kael froze, his stomach turned. Yes. Who wants to know?" The figure stepped forward. Tall, regal, radiant. Kael's breath caught in his throat. It was her. Lyra Sa'thel. The girl he had saved. The child who had been nothing more than hope in a cruel universe. Now a queen. The queen of Elyndra. Called across the stars as the voice of the stars. She did not smile. Her violet eyes burned with a cold fire. "Kael Draven," she said, her voice echoing through the cantina. "You stand accused of crimes against the crown. You stole our secrets. You betrayed our line. And you will pay." The patrons gasped. Some fled. Others crouched low, terrified. Kael swallowed hard. I saved you," he said quietly, disbelief coloring his words. "I risked everything." Lyra's lips pressed together. "And yet here we are. I cannot afford leniency, not publicly, not now." Before he could respond, her guards seized him. He struggled, but they were strong, trained, unyielding, as they dragged him to the golden ships waiting above Tarkon 7. Kael's mind raced. He had expected gratitude, a reunion. Instead, he faced judgment. But later, when the doors of her private chamber closed and the guards were gone, Lyra's expression changed. Her voice softened. "Do you really think I could forget you, Kael?" He stared at her. "Then, why?" "Because sometimes," she said, her hands trembling, "the only way to protect the ones you love is to let them face the world as an enemy, to keep them alive when no one else would." Kael's heart tightened. He wanted to argue, to strike, to demand answers. But deep down, he sensed a larger game at play, one he couldn't yet comprehend. Lyra stepped closer, placing a small, steady hand on his shoulder. "You are the only one immune. Human blood, imperfect, and that imperfection may be the galaxy's last hope." Kael swallowed. "What are you saying?" She looked away, her crown catching the golden light streaming from the ceiling. "When the time comes, you will have to make a choice no one else can. And I cannot guide you." Kael's jaw tightened. He had faced death countless times, but now he realized the battle ahead was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The queen who had been a child in his arms was no longer just Lyra. She was a force, a ruler, and somehow she needed him to be more than just a man. Kael Draven stood in the center of Elyndra Prime's Grand Council Hall, the gold light of the throne room reflecting off polished obsidian floors. Thousands of Elyndri generals, advisors and telepathic nobles filled the chamber, their expressions unreadable, their minds a hum of subtle power. And at the far end of the hall, On the throne he once glimpsed only in Lyra's visions, sat her, Queen Lyra Sa'thel, the girl he had saved 20 years ago, now a figure of unearthly authority, radiating command and control. She looked at him, cold, calculated. "Kael Draven," she announced, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You stand accused of theft of royal genetic secrets, collusion with outlaws, and crimes against the crown of Elyndra. Your punishment shall be decided by the council." The chamber murmured. Kael's stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the hall's doors sealed behind him with a hiss. He was trapped, alone, in plain sight of everyone, before the woman he had risked everything to save. Then the murmuring died. Lyra rose from her throne, walking down the steps with the grace of someone born to command galaxies. Her violet eyes bore into him, full of power and pain. "You saved me," Kael said quietly. "I risked my life for you. You were my savior," she interrupted, voice sharp. "But the galaxy does not know loyalty, Kael. Only consequences. I cannot be seen forgiving you, publicly." He froze. "So, you condemn me?" Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. "Outwardly, yes, for your protection. But in private?" Her tone softened, almost imperceptibly. "I remember. Every choice, every risk. You saved more than me. You saved the line itself." Kael's chest tightened. "Then why parade me as a traitor?" "Because if anyone knew the truth," she said, stepping closer, her shadow stretching across the obsidian floor, "they would try to stop us both. Kill me." "Kill you? The parasites within the throne, the corruption in our systems, they would sense weakness and devour it. You, Kael, are immune. Only you can resist what no one else can." He blinked, absorbing the weight of her words. "Resist what?" Her eyes darkened. "The throne itself. The Elyndri technologies we've rebuilt contain a parasite, an ancient telepathic entity. It consumes minds, controls thoughts, devours souls. I can feel it growing, slowly, imperceptibly. And if I falter, you will be the last line of defense." Kael swallowed. "You want me to kill you?" Lyra shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "No, I want you to stop it if I can't. You are the only one capable. Humanity is flawed, fragile, imperfect, and it is the only thing the parasite cannot control. Imperfection is strength." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "When the time comes, Kael, I will need you to wield the blade of dissolution." Kael staggered back, heart pounding. What?" She lifted a slender, glowing weapon from a pedestal at her side, a sword of pure energy, humming with a dangerous light. "The only tool that can end this. You must promise me, Kael, if I falter, you will be the revolution. You will be the end of the throne." Kael's hand shook as he reached for the hilt. The weight of the galaxy pressed down on him. He realized in that moment the child he had saved was no longer a child. She was a queen, a weapon, and she was trusting him with the impossible. He started, voice breaking. "I promise." Lyra nodded once, eyes closed. Her hand lingered on his shoulder for a fleeting moment, a final touch of trust. The council watched silently, unaware of the private truth passing between them. The public narrative was one of betrayal, but the secret they shared was far greater. The survival of Elyndra, and perhaps the entire galaxy, depended on Kael Draven, the human who could not be controlled. Outside, the stars shone coldly, indifferent. But inside, destiny was about to ignite. Kael Draven walked alone down the corridor leading to the heart of Elyndra Prime's palace. The sheer grandeur of the place was suffocating. Black crystal pillars soared from floor to ceiling, reflecting the golden light streaming from the dome above. The air thrummed with a subtle energy, almost tangible, a whisper of unseen thoughts and memories lingering in the atmosphere. Every step Kael took echoed briefly, but it was quickly swallowed by the hallways, as if the palace itself were alive, watching him. He was not entirely alone. Lyra accompanied him, silent and poised. She was no longer the small and fragile child he had once carried through a burning corridor in a slave market. She was now Queen of Elyndra, the last heir of an ancient empire, radiating authority and power that made the air itself seem charged. But beneath her regal composure, there was tension, a weight she could not show the public. "Kael." Her voice was soft, a whisper in the cavernous hallway, but it carried authority enough to halt him in his tracks. He turned to face her, meeting her violet eyes, which glowed faintly in the dim light. There was something unsettling in her gaze, as though she were measuring not only his ability, but the very essence of his soul. "What do you see?" "A living palace," Kael said, swallowing hard, "and a queen who could destroy a galaxy with a thought." He attempted a wry smile, but it faltered. "But that you already know." Lyra tilted her head, studying him intently. "So you don't know everything yet. There are secrets here, Kael, secrets even the Council doesn't know, secrets that could cost us our lives, or our minds." Kael drew in a deep breath, feeling the gravity of her words. He had faced horrors before, battlefields on destroyed planets, alien slave merchants, psychic monsters that devoured the innocent. But what she was about to reveal promised to be different, older, deeper, more dangerous. "Show me," he said firmly. She nodded and led him through a concealed door behind tapestries depicting Elyndra's history. A narrow corridor opened before them, illuminated by pulsating crystals embedded in the walls. Each step sent a vibration through Kael's body, and he realized it was not the gravity of the palace affecting him. It was something older, deeper, a power older than memory. They arrived in a circular chamber. At its center hovered a platform of black crystal, suspended by invisible forces. The air was thick, heavy with telepathic energy. Lyra stopped and turned to Kael. "This is the heart of the throne," she said. "Not the throne itself, but the core that maintains its power, the collective consciousness of the Elyndra Empire, and within it, something watches us." Kael frowned. "Something? You mean an enemy?" Lyra exhaled sharply. "Not merely an enemy. A parasite, Kael. An ancient entity created to feed on Elyndra minds. It consumes consciousness, manipulates thought, destroys individuality. It lay dormant for centuries, but now it awakens, and it recognized me immediately." Kael's stomach twisted. "And you think I can help because—" She turned to him, and in her violet eyes he glimpsed the child he had once carried, terrified, trusting, fragile. But in the next instant, it was replaced by the queen, commanding, resolute, terrifying. "Because you are human," she said, "your mind is different, imperfect. The parasite cannot control you, cannot penetrate your thoughts like it does the Elyndra. That is exactly why we need you." Kael took a step back. "You want me to enter that core, fight something I can't see, touch, or even understand?" She nodded. "More than that. You must protect it. Prevent it from corrupting not only my mind, but the entire Elyndra consciousness. If it succeeds, the throne falls, and with it, the galaxy." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Kael felt the air itself vibrate, almost suffocating. He realized the platform before them was not merely physical, it was alive. Its edges shimmered with a breathing light, shadows writhing within the crystal, as if aware. Lyra extended her hand. "I know it seems impossible, but there is a way to resist. You must trust me and yourself." Kael exhaled, clenching his fists. "Trust. That's all that's left, isn't it?" Her lips curved in the smallest of smiles, human and fragile. "For both of us, Kael. For both of us." They stepped onto the platform. The moment Kael placed his hand on the black crystal, a surge of energy shot through him. He felt thoughts, and millions of them, attempt to pierce his mind, probing, twisting, pulling. But unlike the Elyndra, his human brain resisted, painful, exhausting, but unyielding. Lyra observed closely, maintaining her own connection to the throne's core. "You're doing it! Do not let it in, not now!" Kael gritted his teeth as pressure intensified. The parasite sensed him, and the assault grew violent, tearing at his mind. Images of wars, death and destruction flashed across his thoughts, designed to destabilize him. Yet, with every flash, a memory anchored him. The face of Lyra, the small hand clutching his, the silent vow he had made to protect her. She raised her hand, and the platform responded. Violet light coiled and intertwined with the black crystal. She spoke in her ancient tongue, words Kael could not comprehend, yet resonating inside him. Each syllable strengthened the barrier between him and the parasite. The core quaked. A form began emerging from the crystal, a shifting, shadowed mass, tendrils writhing like liquid smoke. Kael felt it probing again, more violently than before. "Don't give in, Kael," Lyra shouted, her hands glowing with violet energy. "Use your humanity. Use the imperfection they fear," Kael screamed, pressing every ounce of strength into resisting. Every cell burned, every heartbeat was a hammer against the darkness. Then, amid the chaos, a truth crystallized: he did not fight alone. Lyra was beside him, not as a monarch, but as an extension of his strength. Human imperfection and Elyndra telepathy intertwined against the parasite. With one final surge, Kael pushed his full force into the platform. The core erupted in violet and black light, an explosion of energy that lit the chamber. The parasite shrieked, not audibly but in psychic waves, before being violently expelled, repelled by a barrier only he could maintain. Kael collapsed to his knees, spent. Lyra knelt beside him, placing her hand on his. "You did it," she said, voice trembling. "You saved the throne and all of us." He looked at her, exhausted, and murmured, "It wasn't just me. It was you too. Without you, I would have failed." Lyra smiled, and for the first time in decades, Kael saw the child he had once carried. But now she was also the queen, a woman who trusted him with the fate of an empire. Together, they had faced a force no Elyndra could endure alone. The throne's core pulsed silently now, stable, for the moment. Kael knew this was just the beginning. The parasite was contained, not destroyed, and when it returned, they would need to be ready. But in that silent chamber beneath the throne, there was victory. Fragile, yes, but powerful. Kael Draven, the human who had always believed himself weak and flawed, finally understood his importance in the fate of an entire galaxy. The chamber beneath Elyndra Prime's throne had barely settled after the parasite's expulsion, but Kael Draven's body still burned with exhaustion. Every muscle ached, his mind thrummed with residual psychic shock, and yet he could feel something heavier pressing on him, a responsibility he couldn't escape. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, calm but unmistakably serious. Kael swallowed hard. "So, that's it? We contained it?" Lyra shook her head. "Not even close. That parasite isn't destroyed. It waits, Kael. It bides its time, feeding on the minds it can reach. Every second it survives brings it closer to regaining its full strength, and when it does, the galaxy won't survive its hunger." Kael ran a hand over his face. "And me. You are the only one who can resist it," Lyra said firmly. "Human imperfection is the one thing it cannot manipulate, and that is why this—" She stepped toward a pedestal emerging from the floor, a soft hum emanating from it. "This is yours now." Kael's eyes narrowed. The object on the pedestal was a sword, but unlike any weapon he had ever seen, it wasn't entirely solid. The blade shimmered with energy, shifting between colors of deep violet and pure white. Waves of power emanated from it, brushing against Kael's mind and body as though sensing him, testing his resolve. "The blade of dissolution," Lyra said softly, almost reverently. It was forged to destroy Elyndra telepathic cores, to sever the link between mind and parasitic influence. It can end the parasite, but it is forbidden. No one except a human could wield it safely. If used incorrectly, it could consume the wielder's mind along with the target. Kael approached cautiously, his hands hovering over the hilt. The energy thrummed against his skin, and 1,000 whispers echoed in his head, tempting, warning, testing. He froze, remembering the lives he had taken, the battles he had survived, the child he had once saved. Lyra's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "I trust you," she said. "I always have. And soon, I will need you to trust yourself as well. The parasite will come again, and when it does, the blade will be the only way to save me, to save the galaxy. Kael swallowed, his mind racing. You want me to kill you? She shook her head, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. No, not if I can be saved, but if I cannot, yes, only you can do it. And if it comes to that, I need you to understand why. Kael looked at her, seeing the weight of the throne, the galaxy, and their shared history pressing down. 20 years ago, he had saved her from chains, from fire, from death. And now, she was giving him a weapon capable of ending not just her life, but potentially everything she embodied. He grasped the hilt. The energy surged into his hands, crawling up his arms. He felt every nerve, every heartbeat resonate with the weapon. It was alive in a way, responsive to his intent, weighing his thoughts, sensing the imperfection of his human mind. Lyra's gaze never wavered. I will protect you from the parasite's immediate reach, but the rest depends on your courage. The blade will require you to let go of fear, hesitation, and doubt. Only then will it strike true. Kael inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. And if I fail? You will not, Lyra said firmly, placing a hand over his. Her touch anchored him. I believe in you, Kael. Always have. The galaxy may have abandoned humans, called us weak, insignificant, but it is our imperfection that is the ultimate strength. Imperfection that can outlast infinity itself. Kael's grip tightened. Then we do it together. She shook her head slowly. No, you do it alone. But my presence, my life, it gives you the clarity you need. Remember this. The blade does not merely destroy, it purifies. It severs the parasite's link and preserves what remains of the mind it would consume. A shiver ran down Kael's spine. He could feel the parasite stirring somewhere deep in the throne, faint tremors echoing in his mind, like claws scraping against the walls of his skull. The thought of failing, of not being enough, pressed down on him. But he couldn't afford hesitation. He never had. Lyra stepped back and gestured toward the throne's core. Kael, the parasite will rise again. It will sense your presence. It will test you. You must be ready and you must act decisively. Time is not on our side. Kael swallowed, nodding. I understand. I won't fail you. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes piercing his soul. I know you won't. That is why I trust you with this. The hum of the blade of dissolution filled the chamber, reverberating against the walls, a warning and a promise. Kael could feel the weight of history, of every human and Elyndra life that had ever been lost or saved, pressing against him. He realized that this moment, holding this weapon, understanding its purpose, feeling its power, was the culmination of his life's struggles. Every scar, every death, every choice had led him here. Suddenly, the core of the throne pulsed violently, and Kael felt a psychic pressure slam into him like a tidal wave. The parasite had sensed him. It was testing, probing, trying to intimidate him, to make him hesitate. His hands shook as the blade vibrated in response to the threat. The whispers in his mind rose, a cacophony of fear, doubt, and despair. Kael took a deep breath, grounding himself. He remembered the small girl in the slave market, trembling yet trusting him completely. He remembered the countless battles, the betrayals, and the fleeting moments of hope that had sustained him. He remembered Lyra's hand, resting on his shoulder, steady, unwavering. He drew the blade fully, and the energy flared, casting violet and white light across the chamber. The parasite recoiled, its presence pressing against his mind, but unable to penetrate. Kael held the blade steady, focusing every thought, every heartbeat, every ounce of human imperfection into a single point of purpose. Lyra stepped close, her voice calm, almost a whisper. Kael, remember what I said. Imperfection is strength. Trust yourself. The pressure grew, the whispers intensified, but Kael did not waver. Slowly, methodically, he advanced toward the core, the blade of dissolution slicing through the psychic miasma like a beacon of clarity. The parasite shrieked, its tendrils of shadow recoiling from the purity of human will, from the imperfection it could not consume. Kael raised the blade high, and the chamber filled with light, vibrating with energy that threatened to tear reality apart. He plunged it into the core of the throne. The parasite's scream echoed, not just in the chamber, but in every mind connected to the throne. Shadows writhed, clawing, fighting, but the human will behind the blade was unyielding, and then silence. The core pulsed once, faintly, and went still. The parasite was expelled, severed from the throne. Kael collapsed to his knees, the blade still glowing faintly in his hands, the psychic pressure receding. He was exhausted, every nerve screaming, but alive. Lyra knelt beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "You did it," she said softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You've saved the throne, you and all of us." Kael exhaled, the weight of the galaxy lifting slightly from his shoulders. "We did it together," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. She smiled, the first real smile he had seen in years, a fragile but unbreakable connection between them. "No," she whispered. "You did it. And that is why the galaxy will remember the human who could stand against the impossible." Kael looked at the glowing blade of dissolution, the magnitude of what he had just done crashing over him. 20 years ago, he had saved a child from chains. Now, he had saved a queen, a throne, and the very essence of an empire. Imperfect, human, fragile, yet in this imperfection lay the only force strong enough to resist infinity itself. The victory was temporary. The parasite might return. The threat was far from over. But for the first time in decades, Kael Draven felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. And beside him, Lyra's hand rested in his, a silent acknowledgement that no matter how impossible the odds, they had survived and would face whatever came next together. The golden light of Elyndra Prime's throne room had dimmed, leaving only faint glimmers of violet and white reflecting off the obsidian floor. Kael Draven stood beside Lyra, gripping the blade of dissolution tightly, every muscle tensed, every nerve alert. The parasite had been severed from the throne, but its presence was far from gone. Somewhere, deep within the psychic network of the palace, it stirred, patient, cunning, and insidious. Lyra's eyes, once steady, now flickered with unease. "Kael," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of the empire itself. "It's coming back, stronger. It knows we've acted, and it will attempt to seize control. My mind first. If it succeeds, the entire network will collapse, and with it, the galaxy." Kael tightened his grip on the blade. "Then we stop it, whatever it takes." She shook her head. "It won't be just a battle of strength, Kael. It will attack from within, fragmenting my thoughts, twisting my memories, turning allies into enemies. The only thing standing between me and complete corruption is your human mind, imperfect, fragile, and yet unbreakable in ways they cannot comprehend." Kael took a deep breath. He had faced wars, monsters, even death itself. But the idea of entering her mind to protect her was something entirely different, something terrifyingly intimate. Yet in that terror, he found a familiar resolve. This was the child he had once carried from the slave market, the girl who had trusted him completely. And now, she needed him more than ever. They approached the central core of the throne, the blade of dissolution humming softly, attuned to the psychic resonance around them. Lyra closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, and Kael followed, extending his consciousness cautiously, aware of the parasite's lurking presence. At first, there was silence. Then, a whisper, not in words, but in thought. A creeping, suffocating presence that clawed at Kael's mind, probing, testing, seeking a weakness. "Kael." Lyra's voice trembled in his mind. "It's inside. It's trying to divide us now to make you doubt me." Kael steadied himself, remembering the streets of Port Rygas, the fire, the chains around her small wrists, the fear in her eyes. "She trusted me once. I cannot fail now." The parasite surged, a torrent of darkness and whispers that threatened to tear his focus apart. Memories of betrayal, fear, and endless war flooded him. It tried to use his own imperfections against him, the regrets, the failures, the endless ghosts of his past. Kael gritted his teeth. "I'm not afraid of it. Not for her. Not for us." He pushed forward, the blade acting as a conduit, a focus for his will. Light surged from it, cutting through the shadows that sought to invade Lyra's mind. The parasite hissed, not with sound but with psychic anguish, lashing out, probing her thoughts, twisting her memories, turning moments of triumph into visions of despair. Lyra cried out in her mind, and Kael felt her fear as if it were his own. But he clung to her essence, the core of who she was beneath the corruption. Every human instinct, every ounce of imperfect will became a tether between them, resisting the parasite's influence. "Focus on me, Kael," Lyra shouted. Her voice, though strained, carried strength. "Do not let it touch me." He did not. He could feel the parasite's presence shrinking under the combined force of human determination and Elyndra telepathy. But it was clever, it adapted, shifting, becoming subtle, more insidious. It inserted false memories, illusions, doubts, images of Kael failing, of Lyra alone, of entire worlds burning. Kael's vision blurred. His head spun, but he steadied himself. "It's lying, none of it is real. I saved her once. I will do it again." He lunged forward mentally, thrusting the blade of dissolution into the core of the parasite's psychic projection. A scream of pure darkness erupted through the chamber, the psychic equivalent of fire tearing through the palace's very foundations. Shadows writhed, shrieking, attempting to lash out, but Kael's human imperfection, his flawed, unpredictable mind, resisted their control. Lyra's consciousness was wavering. He reached out, holding onto her mind, as if he could anchor her with sheer will. He felt her slipping, the parasite's tendrils curling around her thoughts, twisting, consuming, but he refused to let go. Every memory of trust, of hope, of their shared past became a lifeline. "Kael, you're here. You're real. You're human." Lyra's voice whispered through the mental storm. Her hand, trembling, found his in reality, grounding them both. The parasite shrieked again, and the throne trembled. Light burst from the blade of dissolution, blinding and pure, lancing through the psychic darkness. Kael pressed forward, driving the energy into the parasite's core, severing its link to Lyra. For a moment, everything paused. Silence. The shadows receded, dissipating like smoke in sunlight. Kael collapsed, breathless, gripping the hilt of the blade. Lyra sank to her knees beside him, shaking, tears streaming down her face, but alive. "You did it," she whispered, voice breaking. "You saved me." Kael exhaled, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle in his bones. "We did it together," he said, though he knew the truth. It was his human flaw, his unpredictable, imperfect mind, that had resisted the parasite, that had preserved her consciousness when no Elyndra could. Lyra leaned against him, fragile and exhausted, yet resolute. "The throne is safe for now, but the parasite isn't gone entirely. It will return." Kael nodded. "Then we'll be ready." "Imperfection is our strength, remember?" She smiled faintly, resting her head against his shoulder. "Yes, and humanity may yet be the weapon the galaxy needs against the infinite." For a long moment, they remained there, intertwined in exhaustion, relief, and an unspoken understanding. The past had forged them, the present had tested them, and the future would demand everything they could give. Kael's eyes drifted to the blade of dissolution, still humming faintly with energy. He understood now the full weight of the promise he had made. This weapon, this human imperfection, was the galaxy's last defense against a force that sought to erase minds, souls, and legacies. And in that understanding, Kael Draven, once a forgotten soldier on the margins of a decayed humanity, realized that he was no longer just a survivor. He was a savior, flawed, human, and indispensable. Outside, Elyndra Prime glimmered under distant stars, indifferent to the struggles of mortals and gods alike, but within its walls, A human and a queen had proven that imperfection could triumph over the infinite. Yet Kael knew, as he looked at Lyra and the throne, that the final act was still ahead. The parasite, cunning and patient, would not yield. And when it returned, he would have to stand once again against a darkness no mind but his own could resist. The throne room of Elyndra Prime was a cathedral of light and shadow. Its obsidian floors reflected the pale violet glow of the blade of dissolution, now sheathed but still humming with residual energy. Kael Draven stood at the center, every fiber of his body exhausted, yet alert. Across from him, Lyra Sa'thel, the Queen of Elyndra, her crown catching the ambient light, gazed at him with a mixture of fear, trust, and resolve. The parasite had returned. Kael felt it in his mind before he saw it, a creeping darkness, insidious, pulsating like a storm beneath the surface of reality. Its presence bent the edges of thought, twisting memories and intentions. It had learned, it had adapted, and it was hungry for the ultimate prize. Lyra's consciousness, her life, and through her, the entirety of Elyndra. Lyra's hands trembled slightly, though her eyes were fierce. Kael, this is it. Once it takes control, it will be unstoppable. You must— I know, Kael interrupted, voice low, steady, determined. He tightened his grip on the blade of dissolution, feeling its resonance align with his own imperfection. He understood now. It was not merely a weapon. It was an extension of his humanity, a conduit through which his flawed, unpredictable mind could confront and destroy a force that had never been defeated. The parasite struck. Shadows erupted across the room, coiling and twisting in impossible shapes, lashing at Kael's mind. He staggered under the psychic weight, memories of battles, losses, and the countless faces of those he had failed pressing into him. The whispers were deafening, doubt, fear, and despair, all weaponized against him. Kael gritted his teeth. I am human. I am flawed. I will not break. He lunged forward, blade of dissolution raised. Energy surged from its core, striking the parasite in waves of violet-white light. The shadows hissed and shrieked, retreating momentarily but returning stronger, more cunning. The parasite twisted within the throne itself, its tendrils reaching for Lyra, seeking to control her mind, to rewrite her will. No, Lyra cried, clutching at Kael's arm. You can't let it touch me. He pressed the blade forward, driving it deeper into the heart of the throne, into the parasite's psychic projection. Pain shot through him, searing, consuming, threatening to overwhelm his very consciousness. He felt it probing, twisting, clawing at his mind, but it could not conquer the human imperfection within him. Lyra closed her eyes, letting her trust anchor him. You've done this before, Kael. You can do it again, Kael screamed, pouring every ounce of will into the blade, into himself, into the bond they shared. Memories of Port Rygas, of the market fire, of the small hand clutching his, all surged through him, a lifeline against the psychic storm. The parasite shrieked, a soundless howl of rage and frustration, as the blade of dissolution severed its tendrils from Lyra's mind, tearing through the centuries-old corruption. The throne quaked. Light erupted from the blade, flooding the room with blinding radiance. Shadows writhed, screaming, clawing, but the human imperfection at its center held firm. Kael's body trembled, every muscle straining, consciousness teetering on the edge of collapse. Yet still, he held the blade steady, resolute. The parasite launched one final assault, targeting Kael's mind directly, attempting to corrupt the conduit that was him. Pain exploded, blinding and absolute. Kael's vision blurred, his thoughts scattered. But he remembered Lyra's words, "Imperfection is strength." With a final, shattering surge, Kael drove the blade through the parasite's psychic core. Light tore through the throne, erupting in waves that shattered the shadows, scattering the parasite into oblivion. The throne trembled violently, and then— silence. Absolute, profound silence. Kael collapsed to his knees, the blade of dissolution clattering to the floor. Every nerve burned, every thought fragmented, but he was alive. Lyra fell to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she held his face, her eyes brimming with tears. You did it," she whispered. "You saved me, the throne, everything." Kael's lips moved, voice hoarse. We did it together." "No," Lyra said firmly, shaking her head. "You did it. Humanity. Your imperfection. It's the only thing that could withstand infinity. And you, Kael Draven, are the one who faced it." He looked down at the broken hilt of the blade, its glow fading, knowing the cost of victory. He had given everything. Not just strength, not just skill, but the very essence of his human spirit, the unpredictable force that had turned the tide against a being that had devoured minds for centuries. Lyra placed a hand over his, trembling yet resolute. "The galaxy will remember, Kael, not the throne, not the parasites, not the imperfection of the Elyndra, but the human who dared to stand against infinity itself." Kael exhaled, exhaustion washing over him. For 20 years, he had been a ghost, a survivor, a forgotten human living on the margins. And now, through trust, courage, and flawed humanity, he had left a mark that would echo through generations. The golden light of Elyndra Prime streamed through the chamber, illuminating the broken but victorious human kneeling beside a queen. Outside, the stars of the galaxy remained indifferent, but within the palace, history had been written. Imperfection had triumphed. Humanity had prevailed. Years later, the Treaty of Draven would be signed, establishing the alliance of free species. Humans, once dismissed and marginalized, were recognized as vital and resilient. Elyndra thrived under Queen Lyra, but in the palace's heart, a statue stood, forever commemorating the man who faced the infinite, a kneeling human, blade broken but spirit unyielding. Engraved on the base, in both Elyndra script and human language, Kael Draven, the human who faced the throne and defeated infinity. And in the quiet moments of the palace, when Lyra walked among her people, she would often pause by that statue. Her violet eyes would soften, and she would whisper to the memory of the man who had saved her, her empire, and perhaps the galaxy itself. "Kael, the universe gave me a crown, but you gave me a reason." For Kael Draven, the story ended not with glory or conquest, but with the unyielding truth of humanity, imperfect, fragile, mortal, and yet capable of standing against the infinite. The galaxy would never forget him. The end.